Welcome to Shattering Glass In Heels. In today's episode, I am joined by Alarice Lonergan, strategy growth and transformation executive, and a dear friend. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another great episode of Shattering Glass In Heels. Joining me today is my good friend, Alarice Lonergan, who is a strategy growth and transformation executive. Hey, Alarice, how are you doing?
I am great. Thank you so much for having me, Christine. I am thrilled with what you've got going on and just so excited to be part of this.
I am super excited that you're part of this and just really excited for us to have a conversation. But every time you and I have a conversation, it's always a good day. Great. Let's talk a little bit about you and your background. So you and I obviously have worked together, and you and I work in very parallel industries that are extremely male dominated, mainly financial services. Talk to me a little bit about what it feels like to being a woman in a male dominated industry. Maybe a little bit about your story of also just how you got to where you are and playing in these spaces.
Sure. So I've been in the financial services and consulting industry for about 20 years. And actually, it even stems back to as a child, I would help my dad in tax, accounting, mortgage, real estate business. So I got a foray into the world of finance years ago as a kid. I would help him in his office as he was preparing translations for different clients and preparing that content. And then I started in the consulting arena, mostly within financial services across banking, insurance, spent some time in healthcare and retail consulting, and just helping transform those businesses from the ground up. And it's always been male dominated for the most part, every which way you look at it. I think it's gotten better, candidly. If I'm being honest around it, it's better, but we're not really equal at the table. And that's whether it's my clients or even, the own institutions that I'm a part of. But I think that there's so much opportunity for us to be able to grow in this space. And when you have some dynamic women in the room, it just changes the game to begin with. And I'd love to delve more into that.
Yeah, no, I definitely want to delve into that. Tell me a little bit about like maybe some of the challenges, opportunities, and advantages that you've had or, throughout your experience. I mean, are there advantages? So can you talk a little bit about what it means to be, one of the few or the only one within, those circles of, that are male dominated. And then I think for you and I also is like that extra layer of being part of the BIPOC community and having that level of diversity that also adds a dimension of complication, I think, as well.
Yeah. So it's many times I am the only for many different dynamics. So I'm half Hispanic, as you know, Christine, but many of folks who are watching this will get to tune into that.
Yeah.
Half Hispanic and half Italian. So I've always been in a mixture of worlds when I think of my representation and background. But then in the room, oftentimes I'm the only woman. And then as I've risen through my career, even being the only woman leader across a room full of men often. And gosh, that happens where you go into a room and they don't know you're the lead in the room, but you're the one who has the authority. And so I've definitely been in those kinds of situations. But to me, I've opened up the space for myself and said, look, there's no one paving that road for me. So I'm going to pave it my way. And I don't have to emulate what's already there because I knew I couldn't emulate it. I'm not like other people. So it's almost creating a new foray. And I felt this way, Christine, where you have to show up as your authentic self because it's just too hard to pretend to be something else. It takes too much work.
Yeah.
So the way I've always been able to be successful is I speak my mind. And I think this is where you and I both get along really well. Speak my mind. When I've got a point of view, I let folks know about that point of view. But then I do a second thing because I think it's also important that we encourage inclusivity when we're in these spaces. And so I often ask all different counterparts in the room, what's your perspective? I haven't heard from you. I'd like to hear your voice because that is how I'm changing the game from when, maybe I was coming up and voices were not all equal at the table. I'm super, super conscious of it, just coming from that diverse background, that I want to make sure that there's just diverse perspectives. And even when I think about teams, like I want to formulate teams that are all different walks of life because I think that's when you get the best results. So for me, it's like going against what is the traditional, I think is really important, encouraging that around me as well.
We're at a point in our careers where I think it's safe for us to come in with our authentic self. And for me, that took a while, right? It comes with kind of experience and maturity to kind of be at this point for me to even be able to write the book, to be able to talk about this. Because early in my career, I was told, do not call attention to your race, your gender, keep your head down. And a lot of times when I was, being the one or one of the few, I was also told to kind of tone certain things down to make people feel comfortable around interacting with me. So it's some things like, my face looks very youthful, so can I dress up a little older and wear glasses? Gosh, I think I owned a lot of like Hermesy type scarves because that was kind of like I looked like that Upper East Side businesswoman with a business scarf in my 20s because I was trying to look older. Did you ever experience that? And as because I think a lot of people who are also listening to this are people who are probably in the beginning of their careers or like mid-career where they probably don't feel that they have the courage or a point in their career where they can take that risk. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Oh my goodness. Yes, 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 yes. To all of that, because especially early in my career, I felt like, gosh, I looked young also, and I wanted to be able to command respect. So there I was making sure I put on a blazer, even though the blazer was not my style. I've gotten accustomed to have cute blazers now, to be fair. But back then I felt like I had to dress a certain way to look more mature and to look a specific part. And then you get told, you've probably heard this too, it's about executive presence and what kind of executive presence you have. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, what does that even mean? Lo and behold, nowadays we know what it means. It's a very traditional sense of the word executive and what you expect to see. And I think that was kind of this conditioning that even as I entered the workforce, I was hearing you need to have executive presence, dress a certain way, look a certain way. So I definitely did. But I also had my own little style as part of it at the same time. So I still had my flair. But I think that part of it was also a respect thing. That is what I was learning early on, of you dress a certain way to be able to match your clients. And that's the way I looked at it versus, I have to dress this way because of my age, even though that was a factor. It was more dress how your clients dress. And if they're wearing suits, you should wear a suit. If they're wearing, dress slacks, you should dress a certain way. A lot of it, I think the challenge was the vernacular and way of speaking was different too. So it's not just a conversational talk that you would have. You felt the need to use certain words. And I mean, we've been in the consulting world for a long time. And I think you invent a number of different words, honestly, that just sound hilarious at times. It's just strategery and strategize and, all those kinds of the lingo, I think was the other piece of getting used to that. And I think over time, as I got confident around subject matter, as I got confident within the particular industry and learning, I didn't have to fall into what you're expected to say or the way in which you have to say it. I could actually start coming through with that authentic voice. So I think if I were to describe or advise younger folks coming in, just grasping the concepts, grasping the content industry domain area. And then, yes, there's a little of the vernacular you have to use in some of those parts. But what people actually really respect is the transparency that you give and when you're communicating and you're telling them and talking to them, here's how I really see the problem. Here's how you should really address it versus trying to sell them something that doesn't make sense or, use these big words that don't really make sense. Because what I also found, right, Christine, is in these business contexts, they don't understand all of that vernacular anyway. You just want to be able to speak in plain language. I have XYZ problem. Here's how we solve it. But that's kind of how I faced it. I think I definitely have changed a bit in terms of my dress, my speak for sure, but for the better, hopefully.
No, I think I always love wearing suits. I'm really grateful that, women's fashion has changed so much. So, because I started my career as well, and as you did where pantyhose was not optional.
Oh.
And so, or wearing something sleeveless was not also like an option. And I think my wardrobe cannot, I still have all those expensive silk scarves that I'm just so traumatized by them in some ways that I can't even look at them. But yeah, I like that piece around executive presence, and you just saying like, what does that even mean, right? And you and I have very similar backgrounds where we both came from creative agencies into the consultancy. And creative people, when we first came into the consultancies, were really scary people because like they're like, wait, these are the jeans and sneakers and hoodie wearing people. And that was just not like the accepted thing, right? To try to figure out how do creative types fit into a corporate setting, and how does that, kind of executive presence, because there's definitely a very different way in terms of how you maneuver that in a creative agency and how you approach your clients. It's a little bit more lax. It's a little bit more casual. It's all about relationships and that relationship building on a very different level. Where in the corporate side of the house, it's a lot more buttoned up. It's a lot more formalized. It's a lot more transactional. It's still a relationship, but it's a different kind of relationship. And I think that that's where we've seen a lot of that change, where, we've infused a lot of that creative talent into the corporate world. Talk to me a little bit about that, because that's something that I get feedback on. It's like, oh, you don't have the executive presence. And, I definitely have a presence. It's just that my personality is a little bit different, very accepted within marketing and creative circles. But in corporate, there are people who are turned off by that or just don't see that as normal. Is that something that you've also experienced, especially like within the financial services? Honestly, when I came onto the scene in financial services, people found it refreshing. But, I also know that there are also people that were intimidated or just didn't like that change or that new dynamic of a person kind of coming in. I'll let you talk a little bit about that.
So this is so fun. We can go on and on about this one. So I think when we first started, there was a lot of the traditional in, especially in banking, you would see the traditional suits and ties. That has definitely changed over the trajectory of the last, 5, 10, 15 years, even, where it's a lot more relaxed. They don't all wear suits anymore. They don't all wear ties anymore, which is a big change, especially in banking. So, I've covered the gamut of financial services. But in certain roles, this is where you've seen some of the changeover happen in parts of the organization that's really dealing with clients at your own client. If they're dealing with clients, they're still dressed pretty professionally and have suits and everything. But then you go into, like, I've done a lot of work with the digital teams, the digital tech teams. They're all wearing jeans, and their fancy thing is to put a little blazer on top of the jeans outfit that they're wearing. And it's interesting because you've seen so much of an infusion, to your point, of creative, diverse talent coming in from all different experience levels, where it was actually no longer about, how you're dressed, it's how you're performing. And then you almost look cooler. You have to have good sneaker game. That's what I've noticed.
Yeah.
You have to have, right. And
Great sneaker game.
yeah, exactly. So that's the thing that's changed, which is really interesting, because it's like, dress comfortably, because I want you to be and feel as productive as you possibly can. And you shouldn't feel restricted in what you're wearing. And so that's been embraced a lot with the digital clients I work with, the digital tech clients I work with. You see that changeover. And then it started to infiltrate into some of the business areas as well. But I'll tell you, when I go to some of these networking events with other women, it's definitely still dressed really nicely. No one's really wearing jeans, because it's a great area where it's a little more traditional still. So it depends on the group that you're working with. But the executive presence, what I really recognized over time is it wasn't necessarily just about how you dress. It's actually about how you compose yourself in front of others, with teams, with your clients. And so there is certainly a way of speaking, a way of communicating. And to me, it's actually just being about very clear and concise in the way that you're communicating. And that is what commands presence. That's what commands the executive presence. So it wasn't how I thought it to be. It was just this look, but it's actually about the content and the way that you communicate a clear point of view. So hopefully we've all evolved to that, but I can't speak for everybody.
No, that's true. And I'm laughing because financial services in New York, I just saw this whole video on Instagram about like how all the guys now are all about their vests, that all the financial services firms have their little vests, and they're branded, but like call them different things. Like I think the Patagucci's or like what they call them, because you have to be a certain brand. If you can get the Patagonias or the North Face ones, and your company's logos are that, and then like lower end ones, like now the guys on the floor, on the trading floor, even within financial services, all judge each other based on like, what brand their vest kind of the logo, which is funny. And then the sneaker game on top of everything else. I think it's fun to see that that's been like the new uniform in financial services in New York. But also like for me, it's like I lived in New York, obviously like grew up in Jersey as well, like and
that's our Jersey love right there.
Jersey love, exactly. Shout out to Maplewood South Orange for me. But I've moved to the West Coast since, like, and it's interesting to me to just really see the different ways of business conduct between the East Coast and the West Coast. Definitely the East Coast has a lot more of that formalized suit and tie kind of thing. When on the West Coast, it's interesting to me, like they'll have a meeting and people are like, yeah, we're going to go meet at this restaurant by the beach. And the guys are like nice shorts, like slacks, and just the formalities are completely gone, and women are not, really just it's not the suit game, it's the dress game. So it's very, very, very different, and it's really kind of interesting to see that. But you're right, that executive presence is not about the way that you look, it's really about the way that you talk and that you conduct yourself. And I think, to me, still, I think the still biggest change, what I like probably a little bit about California, is it's still really about that deep relationship and that bond that you build as a genuine relationship, as opposed to that more transactional buttoned up relationship. So
But you can't go out there, Christine, and wearing a suit if you're going to go have a meeting on the beach. So it still holds true that you have to kind of dress the part of folks. I mean, it would look pretty funny if all of a sudden you're out there in a suit and everyone's wearing a little more casual attire. They're going to think you don't really understand how we work. And, so that there is that element of kind of, fitting in with your clients and the people that you're working with. So it would still stand out.
And you're right. And there's a very distinct difference between casual beach, meaning you actually going to the beach, versus having a meeting at the beach.
Exactly.
Be clear, you don't show up in your flip-flops. So, it's that beach sports bar kind of like look, but it's not your flip flops. So let's talk a little bit about just we've talked about just like, I think, women helping women, right? And I just want to dive a little bit into that, right? As you kind of gone to your career, for me, majority of my sponsors and my mentors have been men, but although I've had really good female mentors, and a lot of folks that I really talk about in the book, like Hattie, that have been instrumental to me. Talk to me a little bit about that, because you and I are very similar in that we know what it's like to have to break the glass ceiling first and not have a woman like pulling you up, very rare. And you and I just really try to pull each other up and pull other women around us. But I wanted to let you dive a little bit deeper into that topic for you.
So it's similar for me, Christine, right? I had a lot of male allies, and I think that was really important. I like to delineate between or among mentors, the sponsors, and your coaches. And so I think I've had a variety of different mentors over time who will give me advice at different points and stages of my career. That's been a mix of men and women over the years, but often my sponsors have actually been my male allies, and they've sought out different opportunities for me to take on, and even pushed me outside of my comfort zone as well when I didn't think I was maybe ready for those roles. I had that a little bit of imposter syndrome, which sometimes you get. And, then I found myself in a position of wanting to be able to create that sponsorship for others as well. And then your coach oftentimes is someone who is, either your direct boss, your direct manager. And over the years, I had one female manager coach over the time period. And that was probably my worst one of all the times of all the coaches and direct managers I had. But it was often the sponsor was a male ally. And then I did have a number of great female allies and I'll say some other sponsors along the way who've helped me forge my path to paying it forward to other women. So something I've talked to you about often is I'm a co-president of the Women's Bond Club, which is a 100-year-old organization that's founded on the principle of women helping women and paying it forward and bringing more people into the finance, innovation, and technology space. And I feel such a privilege to be able to be a co-president for that. But it has corporate member firms from all of these, very well-known financial institutions, partners like IBM, Salesforce, Microsoft, Google, and then the big banks, big companies, and fintechs along the way. But that forum, I was actually introduced to it through two of my female allies who helped forge pathways to that one. But as far as my career, it's really been male allies that have kind of been the ones that helped me. So when you think about that, and I go back to the executive presidents, I go back to these different opportunities, there's no one that looks like you, is like you in any way, shape, or form. But I actually think that is what could be the differentiator in also making you successful, is because those other pathways were the ones that are tried and true before. And if you're trying to really do transformation, you're trying to do something different, you need a different voice at the table. You need a different perspective at the table. So to me, it's about seizing those moments and opportunities, embracing that. And one of my great coaches I had over the course of my career, he said to me, you should lean into it. He's like, Alarice, you should lean into some of that actually, because it's going to be helpful, because you're paving a course that hasn't been paved before. When I was going up to become an executive at my current organization, I was 5 months pregnant going up to become an executive. Right here I am, half Latina, half Italian, leading a transformational program at a major bank, one of the top banks in the country. And nobody looked like that kind of a person at all whatsoever. And I remember as I'm going through the process and getting advice from HR and everything, going through it. And I said, I'm just growing a human, but I can do all of this stuff at the same time. That's all that's the only thing that's different about me versus everyone else. And they're looking at me like, I think there's more to it than that. But I was leaning into it. I said, let me lean into the fact that, yeah, I'm paving a course and a pathway that then what I didn't realize in the moment and started to realize as I'm going through this experience of getting promoted to executive, I was setting the course for so many other women behind me that were saying, okay, you can be in a consulting industry, be a hashtag lady boss mom out there. You can lead transformational programs with your clients, and you can have your career, you can have your life. You have to chart the path that you want to take. This was the path I wanted, and I knew that I wanted. It's different than everyone else's paths. And I know we've talked about our paths too. But I realized the importance of what I was doing as I was going through it. And I said, I can't be the only one going through this again. So yes, this is me going through it this time, but I want to make sure that there's many more women that come behind me there as they're going through executive, they've had their first child, or that they feel like they can, live in different parts of the country as they go through this. There's so much that it was starting to pave the way for, that I didn't realize until I was there going through it, being the only.
No, I love that. And thank you, because, earlier in my career was just, you're going to have a choice. And the choice is, are you going to be a mom? Are you going to be a wife? All of these choices that you're going to have within your relationship. If you want to be successful, you're going to have to choose. Yeah. You can't have it all. And part of it is that the women who were successful before me had to make that choice. There was never a world where they could imagine that they could be in exactly your shoes of going through the promotion cycle, leading a large transformation in one of the top banks in the United States, and then also being pregnant and having a baby. There's always been that fear with a lot of women who were pregnant or having to face maternity, that they're going to come back after that and be less than, and that it's going to set them back. And, it's just, you're right. There's nothing that has changed here. It doesn't mean that I'm less than when I left. I just had a baby. It's like my mind still works the same way. My experience is not lessened just because I took a little bit of that break. But that is a real fear with a lot of women who still think that it is a choice. What do you say to that? I mean, you've obviously already shared your story, but what do you say to that, to the other women out there? Because there is still that stigma, right? It depends on the
Yeah.
organizations and the place that you have, and it does exist.
It does exist. And, I made it work for me, but everybody has a choice in terms of how you want to proceed with your career, and whether it's about in your particular profession, you feel like you can't have both. It's really up to you and whoever your partner might be in that journey to make the decision for what's right for you. And just because I did it doesn't mean that someone else says, yep, I'm going to do the same exact thing, or that it's right for me. So I think you have to weigh all of the pros and cons, just like any other decision you would make within your career. So I'd say don't let a fear of what can happen after deter you from trying to take that course. Instead, I would say maybe you don't have to write the same course that someone else did. Maybe you can write your own course. And that was the path I chose. Was I didn't see anyone else who was kind of in the stage of their life and career that I was. And I said, I don't look like anyone else here. Nobody else is literally up here going through this process, pregnant, and saying they want to continue within their consulting, career. But I said, well, I don't have to be like the other people that have gone through this. I can chart my own course. And you know what? The worst case scenario, if it doesn't work, I'll do something else. Or like I'll figure it out. But I said, don't let me be afraid to try something and fail, or just not try. So I think it's worse if you think that this is a path that you want to take, or wherever your career is, there's a path you want to take. Don't let fear kind of guide you to not take a leap of faith in whatever decision you want to make, personally, professionally. That would be what I'd say to my younger self, and to anyone who's kind of in that crossroads of, you don't want to say, what if you didn't try? And that's literally what my husband and I had this conversation as I was going to embark in this journey. And he said, you don't want to go and say, what if? Why don't you go through the process? And after you make it, because I know you'll make it, honey. So if you make it, make the decision what you want to do next. And that's what I would say to people who are struggling. Don't hold yourself back. Give yourself grace, right? Because it's not easy going through these processes, whether you're in a consulting role, whether, going for MD at a bank, let's say, those are hard processes to go through. They're grueling, but you have to make sure that you're going in and you're trying your best. Don't let fear stand in your way whatsoever.
I love that. And that seems to be like a common theme that I'm hearing from everyone, is that, for women who are, have it all, is there's always like men of quality in our lives that are really willing to, support that and respect our equality and just push that. I think that's a really super important, factor into our success. Talk to me a little bit about balancing out being a mom, being this executive, and also just doing so much giving back to your community. How do you balance it, or what's your secret around all this stuff?
I love it. I get asked this question a lot. I get asked this question a lot because they're like, oh my God, I see you doing this and this and this. How are you doing it all? And I said, I have no idea. I'm just kidding. You know what it is? To me, it's about prioritizing the things that are important in my life, prioritizing the things that are important to me personally and professionally, and making sure I make time for those. And then when I'm making time for those, be present in those moments fully. So, if I have to do, a work trip, or I have to do something specific to work, I talk to my kids and I say, hey, mommy's going to be gone. I have to do this, and I'm doing this to be able to provide for us. And so they fully get it when I have those conversations. But you better believe, Christine, like if there's an important thing and it's a play at my preschool, my son who's in preschool, and there's a play that occurs at 1 p.m. on a Thursday, I've blocked my calendar like it's any other meeting that I have with a client or a colleague, so that I can show up and be there. And there better be some good reason why I can't show up for that particular event, because I make it part of my calendar. The beginning of the year, I get a whole school calendar of the different activities and things that are going on. I've blocked my whole calendar for those periods when, they're on spring break. So I know that I can prioritize that personal component. And then the professional development pieces and what I do in the give back, both for the Hispanic community as well as for the Women's Bond Club community, those are really important to me. And I can compartmentalize the time periods in which I spend on some of those. And that's really, it's time management, honestly, of how I spend my time and what's going to provide the most value. And then the other thing I think about too is, as you kind of get more and more senior within your roles and within your organizations, you increasingly have to be better at delegating. And I think this was a thing I struggled with when I was going through the point of, yes, you too. That's why you're smiling, right? The same thing. You struggle with this because nobody can do it the way that you can do it. And I don't know how many of us think that way. Nobody can do it the exact way I can. That's right. They're not going to do it the exact way you can. But if you empower your teams and the people that you're developing, underneath you, you actually can do really, really phenomenal work together. And you've created a platform for that next generation to be successful as well. So I just found that learning how to delegate better was really, really an important skill as I continue to rise in my career. But it created these moments to empower so many other people. And it's not like you're not there, right? You are, and you're giving the point of view, the direction. But that was probably the hardest change. And that's when you propel from doing, middle management to senior leadership roles where now you can't be in everything. And so that's also been the power of delegation of my life too.
Yeah, I think that's also the biggest misconception people think of executive leaders. You're not the individual contributor anymore. Most of your time is spent managing people and delegating and dealing with people issues and not being this, not having to be the smartest, most perfect person in the room to actually do it all. And it comes down to being a good executive leader is about being a good people person and really understanding that business is really truly about people and building and developing those relationships.
It completely is. It is because at the end of the day, like whether it's your colleague, it's your family member, a spouse, a partner, your business colleague, your client, they're people at the end of the day. And so it's understanding what they need in that particular moment, what challenge they have, and then how do you bring the right people to help solve that, or the right tools, whatever the combination might be. And recognizing that you might not be the right person to fully answer that question, but you're smart enough to know, I know Joe and I know Susie and I know Diane, and they're the right team together for this particular challenge. And actually your clients and your partners respect that you have actually said, oh, I actually have the right people for this. And rather than pretending you're not, that you're the person, you're not always the person. It's okay.
Yeah, no, I know that as well. There's certain combinations of people that I can't put together because they just don't have the right team chemistry. And that's okay, because it's not just a team chemistry for them to work together, but it's also the chemistry of understanding who do you put in front of the right client that's going to resonate with them. And that's a lot of kind of what we do and as executives. And that's always just been really, really interesting to me. It's, that people have this misconception around what a good executive should look like. Speaking of, I want to dive a little bit deep into the fact that you've got this Italian and Hispanic heritage, which is probably the best way to characterize my Spanish, which is more Spitalian. Italian. I learned Italian first because of opera. And when I lived in Australia, when I first moved to Australia, I was like, okay, are you going to do Italian or Japanese? I'm like, Italian. And so my Italian is so strong that my Spanish sometimes is a hybrid of both. So it's more Italian, to the horrified, Spanish speaking members of my family who are like, why can't you get this right? And to my significant other, who's also Mexican, who's like, I shouldn't understand you, but I can't. It's just, so that, yeah. So, but I wanted to talk about this because, I talk a lot about a book about my experience as an Asian woman. There's a statistic out there that 80% of Asian women fall off the corporate executive tracks. And there's these really old, antiquated stereotypes that are perpetuating that, saying that you're either the lotus flower, super obedient, super quiet, but like really good at your work, or you're this extremely aggressive, dragon lady, tiger mom type thing, and and you're unlikable. So either stereotype is just not a good, candidate for the executive leadership. And it's just so crazy to me that these stereotypes do exist, and that's what the research says. But then I'm also Filipina, which adds to that dimension of complicated history. Philippines was colonized by Spain for 350 years, right? So sometimes I get a little bit of is she Asian or is she Hispanic? But I never really kind of dove into that because I'm really quick to dispel that. But like those are my challenges from my experience. Similar things exist within, Latina women, because like you obviously, don't look white adjacent from an Italian perspective, but look very much Latina. Are there something similar within some of those, stereotypes or barriers within the Latina community as well?
Oh yeah. Oh, definitely. Definitely. And well, and I'll roll it back for a second too. If you actually were to look at the US economy, and you were to look at the Hispanic Latin community within the United States, it would be a $3.4 trillion economy. It would be fifth in the world in GDP size. That's how much buying power the Hispanic Latino community has just in the United States. Like that's tremendous. Then when you start thinking about representation across, Fortune 500, all these, phenomenal organizations that exist, it is very, very slim, right? If you look at the women representation in terms of C-suite is like, what are we at? Like 10% now or so, right? And then you look at Black and Latino and it's like 1%. Right. So when you think about a $3.4 trillion economy buying power, and then you think about representation at executive levels in these institutions where there's the buying power to purchase items from, is disproportionate. Right. So that right there tells you there's a problem because it's not proportionate and it's not representative in general around all the different diverse populations that we have in our country, right? So then, lo and behold, we've got a lot of the D&I different programs to be able to try to increase diversity on all different fronts, right? It has to do with race, religion. It's all different, every gamut you can slice in terms of diversity. One, because it actually is good, right? If you think about it, diverse perspectives are great to have. It means that we're not all thinking the same. So I am a huge, huge proponent of all kinds of mix, age, everything. But then what you wind up finding is that it's like, well, okay, so now we have the one Latina who is in charge of this market. So we're good. We've checked it off and I think we're doing great. We have one Asian American and that's great. We've check that box. We have, someone who represents the Black community and we're done. And someone who represents LGBTQ. Great. Okay, perfect. So we've finished our work. You're like, no. It can't be one and then that's it. Actually, what we have to do is start creating pipelines of talent across all of these diverse populations, because then what we're truly doing is not looking for the one, we're looking for the many that can actually contribute. So if you couldn't tell, I'm passionate about this, but this is how we start changing the dynamic. So in answer to your question, do I see it? Yes. Is it still a problem? Yes. Is there work that's underway? 100% yes, but it's still going to take us time, and it has to actually really be about creating moments of allyship with communities that are not like your own, because we could talk day in, day out to our own communities, but when you go back to what I talked about earlier around sponsorship, it has to come from people not in your same community, because that's how you start actually making it part of everyone's journey and our collective vision to change things forward. So yes, I'm passionate about that.
Like 100%, because I think you and I agree on this in so many ways, right? Like when that sponsorship becomes really critical, because that sponsorship needs to be a genuine conversation. It can't be a checkbox and compliance.
No.
And that's kind of what happens, right? It's a checkbox and compliance. But when we have these authentic conversations within our community as leaders, so it's like, it's a great conversation. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, how do I punch to the next level? Because you can't. It's that conversation at the top to get that sponsorship is not the same kind of thing, and it's really really hard, to kind of pound the table for that. And I think
Yeah.
about just the authenticity of message, right? It's like we're marketers, so that economy that people have been trying to tap into, like so
Yes.
many brands, so many businesses have been trying to tap into both the Latina and the Asian community because they understand what it means for a business and commerce, but no one can seem to quite cut through it. And I think
Mhm.
part of it is, there is a lot of misunderstanding around kind of like understanding our culture, that we're a multi-generational homes. There's a lot about like, we're not quick to, you know, buy into a commercial. We're quicker to go from the recommendation from people around us within our community before we say, we're going to buy this soap and this brand, right? It's things like that, and I think we smell a little bit of the inauthenticity around that. Our cultures do,
Completely.
and disengage.
Completely.
Like
Right.
it's easier for.
Especially when they're the stereotypes, right? So it's like, okay, so now
Oh,
you fit people into, and right, it happens in all these industries, right? There's the stereotypes, and we have to dispel those myths and those stereotypes, because that is, to your point, why people don't trust, some of these broader branding and marketing commercials, if you will, for the product. And they go, okay, to my aunts and my uncles and my community, like, what do you use? Who do you use for this? And what product do you use for this? Because they're going to trust the community versus, something that's generically done based on stereotypes. And that is that's a generational thing that we need to change in terms of a lot of stereotypes. You can go into like the music and entertainment industry, go into, literature, right? Like, I finished your book, obviously, and I loved it. But you have to have diverse voices and diverse representation in literature, diverse voices and representation within, roles. It can't be a traditional Filipino role. It can't be a traditional Hispanic role. It needs to be, whatever the general role is. And any of those different, people could be the leading role.
Yeah, no, and I think for us, like, I'm an immigrant, so, first generation to the States, right? I went here for school and I just never left, and that was not really the plan. But here I am. I would say that I moved here when I was like 15, and before that, I was in Australia. I'm more American than apple pie than I am like really Filipino, to be honest with you, because I had left so young. And like the culture of it is, but I think there's still a little bit of that stereotype as well, like that comes in with the biases, I think, with Asian community or anyone from the BIPOC community. Like, you get that question of like, oh, where are you from? And I said, oh yeah, like at New York City. I'm like, no, where are you from? And I know
Right.
that's like the economies and the histories that we have for both of our communities are people who don't know what the homeland looks like, or where they're, acknowledge that that's their heritage, but don't know anything about it because they were born and raised here. And especially with like, your kids, right? Like, it's just dispelling some of that. And it's still so, so many years, centuries within like the United States history, we're still dealing with that. And I think that also perpetuates as well in corporate America. Like there's still this like kind of feeling of like, you're not really here, you're not from here, or you don't really belong, like this is not home. Do you get
Yeah.
that sense as well, like,
Well, it's so interesting because when you think about America, so often described as the melting pot, and there is really no other place like it, where you just have a mixture
Yeah,
of so many different people. Because at the end of the day, 98% of us probably roughly are actually immigrants to the country, right? There's only so many people that are here to begin with. So all of us really at the end of the day immigrate, from a variety of different countries all across the world. And so it really becomes that melting pot. So when people ask that question, where are you from? You're like, well, first off, for me, first off, I'm American. And then, and my background comes from these different compositions. My kids are such a mix. You wouldn't be able to tell where they're from. Like, I think they could fit in with any particular culture probably at this point if you see them. But I'm hopeful that that's kind of the way forward, is that everyone is such a mix that it really stops that question of where are you from, but we're all, here as Americans, whether you've immigrated last year, you came, 20 years ago, or you've always been here. So at some point we'll be mixed enough where that won't be a question anymore. They won't be able to figure it out and trace it some way.
I joked around and said, at some point everyone's just going to be just call themselves Filipino, because that's exactly what we are. We're like mixed.
Everybody, I
350 years
know.
of Spanish colonization, like Chinese, like everyone else is in our thing. And so, it's like, do my 23andMe and I have everything.
No, seriously,
really
it was
do.
funny. My dad went through that ancestry thing, and we saw his background. And the best part about that story is he was 3% Italian. And I tell you, my mother nearly died. She was like, "I knew you were Italian." Oh my gosh. 3%. I don't know.
Like, you're Italian. That's really 3%. The 3% matters. That representation matters. So funny. Oh my gosh. Oh my God. I can talk to you all day, Alarice, but I mean, kind of just want to end it on a really kind of like high note here around just like, maybe just, I think what's so important to you and to me is like paying it forward for our community, for women, for et cetera, and like, and really paving the way where that might not have been a hand before. Like, I guess my last 2 cents here is like, what would you say to like our other peers, like people, other women within our position, probably to help us, like even the BIPOC community and other BIPOC community executive leaders, right, to gain that representation? What advice would you give to them? And even furthermore, to the other women below us, right? Just that advice around lifting as you climb. What would you say to them in order for us to really kind of make that change and that impact, to create that pipeline, to create that, group of people who are banding together instead of, competing against each other to really create that change in the workplace?
Yeah. I think there is a point in your book, and you said this really well, of like lift as you rise, right? And I think that is something I think about often. And I think about, you've got two hands. As you're pulling up, you pull someone behind you. And I think that's how you start creating the space to be able to bring more, because honestly, there's room at the table for so many more of us. So it shouldn't be about competing for spots. It's actually, how do you make room? I also love to say, like, if the table, there's not enough chairs at the table, pull one up, or make sure you pull a chair up for someone else to sit at the table with you. Create moments where people have a voice. If you see that person who isn't speaking up, create an opportunity for them to be able to share their perspective, because that is how we start affecting and creating the change. And as we pay it forward, to me, it's not about me necessarily, being out there in the platform, but how do I actually create moments where I'm bringing other people up? One of my favorite things to do is to help people as they're going through their executive progression. And I love doing that because it's the best way for me to pay it forward and actually change the dynamic of the executive representation that we have across our organizations, and helping coach them, give them the resources that weren't there or accessible to myself. I've opened all of that up. I share, here's past presentations, here's, the types of questions that people ask you. And the feedback I got one time was, Alarice, you and your team are like my guardian angels that I didn't know existed. Thank you for creating this for opportunity for me to be able to feel prepared and ready, and that I can be at the level playing field. And it's not about leaning in. I feel completely prepared. I feel completely ready. And I've gotten this sponsorship where I have an equal seat at the table. So that's the essence of what paying it forward means to me. And hearing feedback like that shows that we're doing the right thing, even if it's 1 or 2 or 3 at a time. That's the pathway that we want to create. There's more room at that table, so pull up a chair.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Thank you, Alarice, for being just part of my Council of Queens, because it's always good to be breaking glass ceilings with someone else and, and when we have those moments like, oh my God, like it's just because there's a lot of those moments where you just know that you've got someone else to lock arms with and that you're not crazy and we're going to kind of push together. So thank you for being that for me as well. I had one more question, and it's a fun question. What is your most memorable shoe and why?
My
You can't walk
gosh.
away here without a shoe question.
You know what? It was shoe in concert with a blazer, believe it or not. So my shoe,
Not matching, we're good.
but no, here is why. Because I wore these amazing Charles David shoes. I love Charles David because I feel like they are stylish but comfortable at the same time. And so there's beautiful nude shoe that I felt like were my power heels. They're, significantly high. I paired them with this like rose pink jacket blazer as I was getting ready to do my executive progression. And I'll never forget the feeling I had wearing those shoes with that blazer, because one, the blazer's pink. Okay. And here I was doing my practice session for executive progression in front of a room full of all men. So I made sure I had my super high heels and that pink jacket. And I just felt like, who run the world? Girls. It was just that moment. And I love those. I love those shoes. They're ridiculously high, but they make me feel awesome in them. So yes.
Love that. I really, really love that. But you're a New York City girl, so I know you and I have the heels and the change of the shoes and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, I usually have at least 2 pairs of shoes. One I'm wearing, one I'm changing into, depending on what's next or where I'm coming from. So yes.
I think you also share this. I know that being in financial services, the men are not usually patient for us to change the shoes. So I used to wear a much lower heel when I was in New York, just because I just needed to run. So, there was no time to change the shoe.
Give me a minute. Give me a minute. I got to change over here. And they looked at me going, yeah, I was wondering how you were going to walk all across New York City in those heels. That was really smart to bring a backup pair.
Yeah, I know. I kind of got to a point where it's like, I know what my 4-hour shoe, my 8-hour shoe, my 12-hour shoe is, and what I can sprint and what I can't.
That's true.
And it's just like, yeah, sure. And I think I remember like my partner one time was in New York and he was like, I know you're not prepared for this, but that's your fault for choosing those shoes. So now you're going to have to run. Let's. And I'm like, ow. But it's, it's kind of like, it's your fault. You didn't come prepared. So, why did I show up to a conference with 9 pairs of shoes? I'm like, exactly for that reason.
And I wanted to have options based on how I was feeling. I had to look at the venue and decide, we have to make game time decisions here.
Yeah, no, I mean, and there's multiple outfit changes. These are the things that guys don't think about. They wear the one suit. There's the one on stage, there's the one when you're meeting clients, and there's the one for the cocktail party and the dinner after, and then the concert after. It's like, they're not the same outfit, and I'm not going to wear the same shoes because I'm not going to walk away with blisters. So these are just, facts. I'm like, true story. I think there's another woman executive that you and I are friends with. So we met in the lobby, same conference. She's just like, she goes, gosh, she doesn't usually fly this airline, and neither do I. She's like, gosh, they were really strict about the weight. She goes, I had to open up my suitcase and grab a couple pairs of shoes and put it in my case. She goes, and it just wouldn't fit. So I said, like, I'm just going to pay the excess baggage, whatever that is, right? Just to check in the luggage, and I'm just going to expense it. I was like, I am so happy to hear you say that, because that was the same situation as mine. And she saw my manager, goes, yeah, you're going to approve her expense report because I said so, because of the shoes. So, yeah. Took another woman executive to get to put them in a place to say, like, you're approving her expense report for her luggage because of shoes, because it's a necessity. It's like, thank God someone else got it. And we need more people like that to advocate for us. So anyway, well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast, and super excited to just keep talking. I know I owe you a phone call tomorrow. Thank you for listening to my podcast. I hope this has inspired you to continue the fight for equality, challenge stereotypes, and lift as we climb. We'd love to hear from you. Amplify the conversation on social media, following @DuquesseCD. For more information about me and my Amazon best-selling book, Walking in My Shoes, Shattering Glass Ceilings in Corporate America, check out DuquesseCD.com.